we rarely credit the initiative that people demonstrate to challenge institutions. So I want to particularly shout out Cynthia and everybody who's been working with her over the last week to pull this event together. I want to briefly address the role of media in war, generally and specifically the ones that we're confronting today. Our nation's gone to war dozens of times in the last 75 years. Every single one of those conflicts was based on public lies. Public lies that often took decades to repudiate and expose. People remember Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, right? People remember the 20 years of lies that enabled the war in Afghanistan, right? We have a habit of discovering a generation after the fact that our country has been conscripted repeatedly into dedicating resources, and here's the key, not just for war. I want to connect some dots here. President Eisenhower warned us that militarism would destroy democracy in America. He was absolutely right. Another figure at the very same time, just 2 years removed, warned us about the intersecting evils of racism, militarism, and capitalism. What happened when we ignored Dr. King's formulation for the ensuing 60 years? What did that recipe lead to? Starts in climate and ends in catastrophe. We have borne the inevitable, predictable impacts of our own institutional ignorance. And it is an ignorance enforced by institutions that we rely on to inform us. The performance of American media institutions in the face of the latest warmongering by both parties in Washington has been absolutely shameful. Do people remember in the late 2000s, there was this whole era where the media went through this supposed reckoning about the way they'd become cheerleaders for war under Bush? And then they forgot immediately. And it is up to us, particularly in a country that claims the value of democracy, to hold those institutions, from the parties in Washington to the media institutions that enable them, accountable. And that's exactly what you're doing here today. Malcolm X warned us that if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you loving the people doing the oppressing and hating the people who are being oppressed. And this relentless xenophobia, the jingoism, the relentless chase for profit at the cost, not just, and this is the point, not just of life for a particular people, right? When we talk about nuclear conflict or climate catastrophe, we are talking about globally shared impacts that cannot be limited. They are limitless impacts. For what? And I applaud each of you for seeing through the lies. I applaud you again for doing something about it and coming out here today. And I want to briefly now discuss two competing or aligned controversies. There was one about this event, right, that everybody's heard about. Any number of voices from across the political spectrum criticizing voices who would come together despite our differences to rally around a common cause, a celebration of life. And the fact that we are willing to come together across our differences makes this movement stronger. And deference to the war machine does no one any favors. So for a third time, I would applaud you for seeing not only through the lies of the establishment and not only taking action to challenge them, but also to take the constructive step of stepping beyond our ranges of comfort and to embrace shared consensus. There's something very powerful in that. The last thing I'll say here is that events like this, opportunities like this to come together and express ourselves are critical, not just for the expression, but for the opportunity to connect. So here today are other people who stand with you. They're standing with you literally right now, so meet them. Take advantage of this opportunity to organize. In these moments are opportunities to grow whatever happens next if you take advantage of them. So don't rest in your circles here today. If you came with people, meet other people, particularly people who might be connected to organizing opportunities. That's how the movement grows. The organizing opportunities for these moments are as big as the expressive ones, so take advantage of that. Another thing we can do beyond expressing ourselves and organizing is contending for seats of power among people who make these idiotic, catastrophic, life-destroying decisions. Having done that, myself, in the 35 years that Pelosi has been in office. I have the distinction of being the only Democrat to face her in a November election, and I won 80,000 votes in spite of what black journalists described as a civic lynching at the hands of the press, from the corporate press to the supposedly independent media in this city. I discovered the hard way that San Francisco's progressive reputation is not in any way deserved. And I don't say this to anybody here, and I certainly don't say this to the 80,000 people who voted for me, but this is a city of virtue-signaling fascists. And this city, I don't mean it as a joke. I want to make this really, really sharp. There is no city in the country that is more complicit in militarism than San Francisco, and here are my data points for that. There are 3 oligarchs that this city has sent to Washington. One of them is the Vice President of the United States. One of them, until recently, was the longtime Speaker of the House. And one of them is a senior U.S. Senator who for a long time chaired the Senate Intelligence Committee. This is a city of under 1 million people. We're not even one of the 3 largest cities in this state. And yet we have 3 of the most powerful officials in Washington serving a seat of white capital. And this is a city that prides itself on its supposed progressivism, while actively enabling oligarchy at every conceivable turn. And I would invite you to take this expression that we are out here today together to demonstrate and to share and express. Take it home. Your neighbors need to hear this. This is not a battle between the West Coast and a far removed East Coast. The West Coast is actively complicit, institutionally. Even if culturally we dissent, we have to translate our cultural dissent into power. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to finally prioritize my own happiness before serving an ignorant country, but I am eager to, in all of the ways that we all have access to, in writing, in organizing, in expressing, to challenge the war machine, to do it with you and behind you until we manage to dismantle it. I want to applaud again everybody who's out here today and invite us to come together again very soon and continue escalating until we end the threat of war once and for all.